What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Handle with Care podcast. My name is Sterling Atkins Dutro.
And I'm Kamar Davis.
And today we have with us a very special guest who is Becky Rossman, the Chief Impact Officer at Lifting Up.
I'm excited to be here. You guys have been doing a great job with this Handle with Care podcast.
Thank you so much.
Can you tell us about your work with Handle with Care?
Absolutely. We are a social impact company, Lifting Up, and we automate Handle with Care. We connect the dots around adverse childhood experiences between law enforcement and trauma-responsive schools. Kids who are exposed to trauma the night before, like adverse childhood experiences, are handled with care. Because what we know is a lot of kids may act out if they've been exposed to domestic violence the night before, if they have police at their house till 2 or 3 in the morning and they didn't get any sleep. And a lot of times those kids end up with disciplinary action when really they just need handled with care. We also know that a lot of students don't show any signs, but when they have that constant toxic stress, kind of like a bear living in the closet, and they don't know when that bear is going to come back out, they have a really hard time focusing. So we help regulate their system, because when you live with chronic toxic stress, it kind of dysregulates your nervous system, and then you're not in a place to learn.
Could you go a little more in depth about the childhood experiences, the adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah. The reason we track those, research shows there are long-term consequences when you have multiple adverse childhood experiences. And those long-term consequences are risky behaviors like substance abuse, medical issues, and mental health issues. But the great news is ACEs aren't destiny. There's protective factors you can put in place, just like all of the interviews you've been doing with the nominated staff who go above and beyond. Having a trusted adult in your life can mitigate those long-term consequences.
Why do you think it's important?
I think it's just important to give kids the best chance at success. When you hear about Peoria Public Schools and you look at like where they are academically, I know they get a lot of flack. When you see the amount of notifications we have coming in, it makes a lot of sense because we have a lot of kids in constant trauma, so they're not in that place to learn. In one semester for Peoria Public Schools, we had just under 1,900 students affected by adverse childhood experiences, and in one semester, 185 students had 3 or more ACEs. I do want the students to know that we don't provide narrative information. So what our company does is it connects the data points between the law enforcement reports, and the schools just get an email every day at 7 a.m., and the subject is Handle with Care, and it has the student IDs. So we don't talk about what happened because that's not the important thing. The important thing is when kids are exposed to trauma, that they receive the care that they need.
What led you into the role of Chief Impact Officer at Lifting Up?
My career has always been in the nonprofit world. I have been a CEO for 17 years for 3 organizations. The first one was a child advocacy center where I was also a forensic interviewer. I would interview children about allegations of abuse for law enforcement, DCFS, and the state's attorney's office. Then I was over Neighborhood House for 8 years in Peoria, where we dealt with issues surrounding poverty. And then the last 2.5 years, I was working at PCAV about gun violence. So I've always been on the reactive end for youth that are experiencing a lot of adverse childhood experiences. So I kind of want to be on the preventative end. And I do have a story. When I was the executive director and forensic interviewer at the Child Advocacy Center, when I would go into an interview, I wouldn't know anything about the child except the first name, the age, and if there's any disabilities that would affect the quality of the interview. I interviewed a 4-year-old boy, and I'm going to call him Alex, and he was a cute little boy, big brown eyes, big dimples. And we go in, and obviously I don't know what's going on, but usually I would sit across from him like I am with you guys, and he wouldn't sit on the seat. And I said, I notice you're not sitting down. And he goes right into the story of what happened the night before. He was at his mom's house, and he really wanted to be back at his dad's. His mom's house was kind of chaotic, and she got mad. She was cooking dinner, and she moved the food over, and she set him on top of the stove. So he had a lot of burns down the back of him. Now, kids are really resilient. So by the time we left the interview, like at the end of the interview, we'd always want to close with something positive. And he had the Spider-Man t-shirt on, so I'm talking to him about Superman, and we're arguing over who the best superhero is. And he just, still has this zaniness of a 4-year-old. And then when I go out, he's showing the police officers how big his muscles are. Even though he went through this really traumatic event, the thing about traumatic events is kind of how we interpret them, right? He was still very resilient, still that 4-year-old. Well, over the course of the next 1.5 years, I ended up interviewing him 2 more times on equally horrific incidents and eventually testified against his mom to terminate her rights. After his dad got custody, they moved to where my kid's school was. Every time I would see this little boy, he recognized me. The teachers were yelling at him. He was always in trouble. He was always acting out. And my daughter even said something to me, how do you know him? He's always in trouble. And I explained to her that sometimes the kids who need the most kindness act for it in the most unloving ways. I love the teachers because my kids had those teachers and they were great with my kids. But all I could think is if those teachers knew what I knew about Alex, they'd be handling him with care. So that's kind of what led me to the role. I saw a lot of things on the abusive end or with the gun violence, the community violence, poverty, all those things tied to ACEs. So I wanted to be more on the prevention side. So I'm really excited now that we can get the information to teachers who are in a great position to help students when they need it, right after that exposure to trauma. That can really mitigate those long-term effects.
Awesome.
We have interviewed a lot of support staff who go above and beyond for students every day. Why is it an important component of the podcast?
So as I mentioned, having a trusted adult in your life is the number one factor that mitigates those long-term consequences. But there's been a lot of research done, and the youth response survey up in Chicago found that students in the presence of a couple of ACEs, if they had a trusted adult inside the school and they played a sport, they had a 53% less likelihood of mental health issues, specifically suicidality. We know how important the role of that trusted adult is. Teachers are perfectly positioned to be able to help those students. And we heard a lot of great ways that people are going above and beyond. So I want to ask you guys, what was something you took away that you thought was a really good way of connecting with students?
So from all of the different podcasts that we conducted, I would say a few of the things I took away are having different perspectives from the people that we interviewed, the support staff, all of their different perspectives on how they support students and how they all tie in together, as well as a couple people mentioned that good mornings go a long way, which I definitely agree with. We say good morning every time we come to school. All of the staff that are in the office always welcome us with a good morning every day, smiles on their face. So that definitely goes a long way. And they're consistent with it. Also, I would say reaching out is definitely a big one. Whether you're a student or support staff or a teacher, I would say reaching out to students that you think are going through things, or even if you're not sure, reaching out, asking how they are, again, good morning, all of that goes a long way, more than you might think.
Well, Sterling actually took everything that I was getting ready to say and said it. So, but yeah, it's definitely, I love that everyone had their own way of showing support. He mentioned probably sitting with students. I remember at Reservoir Gifted, they had a support dog that really helped students. Most of the school resource officers, they would walk around with students, sit with students, and talk to them. Some would volunteer and help at places that other students work or live to help them out. So yeah, it would definitely be learning different ways to show support that all of them showed in their own ways, which is amazing.
I thought they all did a great job. Staff who have never heard about some of the stuff about a trauma-informed lens are intuitively doing it. As you point out, Kamara, they're reaching out in their own way, and as you said, Sterling, being consistent, and that good morning goes a long way. The other protective factor is peers, and I think you guys have provided a lot of good examples. I think you understand the trauma-informed lens more than most adults and how important that is, because not only can support staff step up, but peers can as well. That's going to go a long way to help each other with their success in the future.
Exactly.
Yes. Would you like to leave anything else with the listeners?
I would just say be kind. We heard this over and over from both staff and our student panel that a lot of kids may not go home to love. We don't know what kids have gone through the night before. Let's just show everybody a little bit of grace and think about what else could this be if someone's acting out or not having the best day.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Becky.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Handle with Care podcast. We hope this episode gave you a better understanding on what students and staff may be going through and ways to support them. Remember, you never know what the person next to you is going through. If this episode resonates with you and you need resources but aren't sure where to find them, they are located at the same page of the podcast.